So it looked like Lithuanian culture is turning towards Africa.
There is a grant for a particular amount of money, and we can choose our partners, we can choose the activities, the amount of participants, the amount of, events we will create, the exhibitions. So the costs are related to cooperation with African partners, because of bureaucratic reasons, would be higher, as you said. Then the organizations would probably choose something closer, not because they don't want to, but because it is financially challenging. It takes a lot more effort.
Just to step into the practical processes and having direct working relationships was a very dynamic element, so that from that, these really informal networks of artists started really to develop itself to something like production networks, which...
We are about to start our discussion on diplomation between continents, post-screening discussion, institutional challenges for culture in Europe and Africa, atypical, let's say, regions of the world. Please join us. We have on stage wonderful guests, our, I can say, co-workers from many different projects. On the left, Thomas Engel, theater scholar and cultural manager. He received his doctorate in theater studies from Humboldt University in Berlin and worked as a dramaturgy in German municipal theaters. Since 1988, he has coordinated international projects at the International Theatre Institute, including deconfining arts, culture, and policies in Europe and Africa. From 2003 to 2025, he was managing director for ITI Germany, where he co-developed strategies for international cooperation in the performing arts. Anna Godlewska, a diplomat and expert in public and cultural diplomacy. She has over 20 years of experience as a director or deputy director of the Polish Institute in the United Kingdom, the Czech Republic and Sweden, and as a culture advisor in China. She's currently deputy director of the Department of Cultural Diplomacy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she coordinates strategic partnerships and cultural initiatives at the international level. Edgaras Klivis, artistic director of the National Drama Theatre in Kaunas and professor of theatre studies. He combines experience in managing an artistic institution with academic knowledge in the field of theatre, history and criticism, as well as intercultural dialogue. He is a member of international theatre research associations, the International Federation for Theatre Research and the Nordic Researchers Association. He has collaborated with the Raw Material Company in Senegal, and he develops global partnerships for Lithuanian theatre. Alicja Kosińska, cultural studies researcher and president of the Go and Act Foundation. She specializes in intercultural relations, particularly between Africa and Asia. She implements projects in the field of global education and cultural decolonization. She has worked at the Ministry of Culture and National Institute of Music and Dance. She is currently involved in activities supporting social change through a critical approach to international cooperation. So welcome, all of you, on Survival Festival. And I would like to ask Edgaras, because we showed your video art that you co-created with our partnership organization from Senegal, to tell us about the context of the movie and cooperation with Dakar, your cooperation with Dakar.
Okay, is it working? So first, again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's my first time in Wrocław, and really a beautiful city. We had this opportunity to make this film and also a performance based on the play by the writer from playwright from Burkina Faso, Aristide Ternagda. So we made 2 productions due to support from Creative Europe, a project called Deconfining, which had, at the beginning at least, this idea that the confines of the COVID and the quarantines were gone, and we are returning to a kind of normal world. But do we want to return to the same world that we, that stopped at a certain moment? So that was the idea. And of course, we took this possibility to use the financial support and to reach out, and not only financial support, also other help in reaching out for the artists in the continent where we knew no one, or almost no one. Especially in these countries where we now have our partners. So our 2 of our projects involved people from Burkina Faso, from Burundi, and also from then Senegal. We had to travel, to tour. We made a theater production based on Aristide Ternagda's play, and we had to tour to Burkina Faso. And at first it looked like a possibility, and we were just trying to understand what insurances we should get for our actors, what is happening in Burkina Faso. But then, of course, since 2022, the war started, Russian war in Ukraine, and it seems like so far away from Africa, but in fact, very soon, Wagner's group soldiers were in Burkina Faso, and the country was closed by Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Even the banks were closed, so we had a problem how to pay this playwright, because we could not use to transfer money because the banks, any transfers between Lithuania and Burkina Faso were closed. So anyway, so that was the beginning, and then we also took this opportunity in making this film. So the film is made in cooperation with the art gallery, art center, which is based in Dakar, Senegal, called Raw Material, and they represent this artistic group, also mostly based in Senegal, which is called the School of Mutants. And although it is a group of different artists using different artistic media, we related mostly to this one artist, mostly Hamedine Khan. And Hamedine came 2 years before this production to Kaunas. We have also International Biennial in Kaunas of visual arts, kind of similar like you have something here. And he came, this biennial in Kaunas was somehow also related to Africa. So it looked like Lithuanian culture is turning towards Africa. I don't know if it's going to last, but for a certain moment it seemed like that. So he came with his installation, and we met, and we had an opportunity to speak about this future film. So I asked, Hamedine started looking for relations between Lithuania and Senegal, Africa, or Senegal in particular. And he is researching, he's very interested, as you could see in this film, in this Senegalese film director, or African film director, Ousmane Sembène, who is like the father of African film, if I may say so. Really the most important figure in African film. And he said, so, okay, let's look for some relations. What Ousmane Sembène has to do with Lithuania? Well, nothing, obviously. But he, being a fighter against French imperialism and against, Western imperialism, he saw back then in the 60s an alternative, in the 60s and 70s, an alternative in Moscow, as it usually was also in the West, also in Africa. So he said, well, maybe we will do this kind of connection to the Moscow Film School, and this will be the relation between Africa and Eastern Europe. So I said, Hamedin, it's a very good, nobody forbids you to do whatever you want, but, if we will show a film in Lithuania about Moscow School of Film and Gorky, which obviously, Usman Samben admired. I said all that Lithuanian audience will see will be exactly this, Moscow, Russian imperialism, Soviet occupation, Ukraine. So if you want to see that your film is in this context, you can go on, but otherwise we should rethink this idea. So his new idea was, since there was still no known relations between Senegal and Lithuania, cultural relations, he eventually chose to do this imaginary dialogue. He said, okay, so we have Usman Samben, the father of African film, and you have Jonas Mekas, the father of American avant-garde, not the father, but kind of very important, very active, very important figure in American avant-garde who came from Lithuania, and Lithuania has always been present in all of his films eventually, So since Usman Samben and Jonas Mekas never met, or at least we don't know of the fact that they have met. So, but they were born almost the same year, like 8 days apart. They were of the same generation, One is the leader of African film, another is the leader of American avant-garde, So these two major figures, they never met, but let's imagine if they met, what they would tell each other. So that was exactly what you saw, the imaginary dialogue of the two people. And if you see a lot of differences, but if you listen for similarities, you can hear, like fighting against French imperialism, you find an alternative in Moscow. Fighting against or running, Jonas Mekas left Lithuania as an emigre after the Second World War. Running from Russian imperialism, you find alternative in New York. So those two fates of these two artists are kind of close, but also very different. So you can see, in a certain epic way, the fate of culture, of film culture, at the late 20th century. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry for.
Dziękujemy bardzo za to wprowadzenie. Ja znam trochę tą.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I have to say that I know this cooperation. You need to know that part of the people gathered here, particularly Edgaras and Thomas, are working with the same project as I do, Deconfining. So we exchange our experiences in cooperating with our African partners. And I do have a feeling that we communicate more often about the problems that we encounter in our cooperation, intercontinental cooperation, than about the successes that we are undoubtedly managing to achieve. But so not to make this discussion too pleasant, too nice, and not only pertain to what we've accomplished, my first question to all of you, actually, because you're all experts, actually, in terms of cooperation, international projects. So my first question would be the most common barriers you have encountered in cultural projects carried out, particularly between continents, so such distant areas. Edgaras started with telling us about the difficult situation in Burkina Faso, the domestic war that broke out there, and the implications or complications it had for the deconfining project. Now, maybe the rest of our panelists could also share the most common problems, barriers, or the most difficult ones in conducting international, intercontinental projects.
Maybe I can start because for the German ITA Center, we were serving as the administration center organizers of this project for now 3 years, including the preparation. And yeah, I guess these advantages and these great coincidences, how cultural images and ideas and concepts are suddenly fitting together and creating something unexpected, is just something which came up recently when the artistic cooperations really started to work. And we as institutions, as we are, and it is about institutions on this round here, were mostly responsible for setting up the framework of cooperations and to deal with the European bureaucracy and the big and surely expected obstacles which are in the cooperation between these two continents. Because there is no eye-level cooperation, there is always this kind of very strong pressure of regulations, of certain orders of administration which you have to follow, which are complicated enough already, and then additionally all these conditions of non-expected international developments came up with the war with Ukraine, with change of security levels in our partner countries in Africa, and the whole narratives about cultural cooperation really changed toward being ready for war developments, which was not expected in the end of the pandemic. So we as institutions have somehow set up a kind of safe space with the European money that the artists could work together and could find each other. And of course to work with the increasingly worse developments in terms of travel, visa, cultural mobility. So this is still, since decades, a big problem, and it becomes even worse since the mobility questions and cultures has been mixed up and connected very deeply with the migration question. So, and this goes into security levels and inner policies, and now it becomes much more under pressure with the war conditions. So we have now as institutions a really big task.
As the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I think that's pretty recent. The cultural projects and being supported by our ministry, especially the projects taking place in Africa. We don't have a lot of branches or Polish institutes in Africa. We have embassies, granted, but they are few, and there are no people who would specialize in cultural projects that would be designated only to, let's say, public or cultural diplomacy, cooperation with the community of a given country, African country, in which the embassy is in. So the basic requirement for international cooperation, which is partnership with local entity, is very difficult to achieve, I would have to say. In my opinion, we also have insufficiently mapped area about Poland. Which institutions would be interested in doing something with Africa, some projects with Africa? I think recently maybe this interest has grown. However, I would see this as an obstacle. So relatively low interest in Poland. And then it's difficult for us to promote it. There is a donation program, there is a grant program. I'm pretty sure our Transparent Foundation could tell a lot about it, and that would be it. And then there are study visits that hopefully Roland Chojnacki will mention in the next panel. These are the two only panels we have. The third instrument that tries to combat these bureaucratic obstacles is UNIC. So European Union National Institutes for Culture. This is a network of cultural institutes in Europe that, for example, creates a group of or network of Cervantes, Goethe Institute, Lithuanian, Irish, Dutch institutes. They get together in clusters. There's one cluster per state usually, and there is 143 clusters like that. In Africa, there are only 39 such clusters, I think, or 18 even. Maybe 39 members and 18 clusters. Yeah, I think that's correct. And thanks to those clusters, we can do anything with local entities. That gives us the access. We also use tools that are given to us by UNIC, which is grant programs. Two tools particular. The first one, particularly tailored for Sub-Saharan Africa tool, a program actually that co-finances. It's called Africa-Europe Partnerships Program, and it is being implemented as in the project mode. That gives us possibilities to work. This year, we started a new call for applications for this particular program, and as far as I know, at least one project, one Polish project, was prepared. Our embassy in Tanzania prepared the project along with other embassies. In July, I think the final decision will be made. So I see three major obstacles: human obstacle, the obstacle of low interest and willingness to cooperate, and the third one would be structural or HR barrier. And similarly to Lithuania, I think we don't have very long-standing relations. At least we don't remember such relations with the African states. We used to have more, but I think it just naturally died out because it was based on communist cooperation, different contracts we had in the previous political, let's say, system. So we needed to forge these cooperations anew. There's a lot to be done, but I think it's exciting. It's something starts going on, and this is good. I think the best evidence of these institutional barriers are there. We are sitting here, is proven because we're sitting here, 5 white people, and speaking about Africa. There's not an African person who could participate in this panel, which is paradoxical, but shows the problem, I think. Anna, you talked about, you gave a really nice analysis of these 3 barriers. When preparing for today's meeting, I had a thought that one major barrier would be asymmetry. Great asymmetry in terms of financial funds between Africa and Europe. There's little infrastructure, little history of cooperation. We have very good common denominators between European countries, bilateral contracts and agreements, and in Africa, it's very often building from scratch, such cooperation, such partnerships. So, as you said, we were looking for partners in countries we had nobody. No middle person, no intermediary. So it's very difficult to start something from scratch, build something from scratch. And with this financial asymmetry, the African states usually have so big budgets to travel, for example. So we visit them, not the other way around. True. And the whole stage of phase of building this network that is right now created under the name of deconfining was difficult because majority of our partner companies has never had any European partners. And vice versa, of course. So starting that cooperation was an interesting, long, and definitely not an easy process that in its own probably could become a project. And in our case, it was just the first part, right? Because as 12 European organizations from Europe and the same amount from Africa, we needed to create something together. This was the clue. This was the main goal. This is why we got grants from Creative Europe. So, referring to what you said, Alicja, yes, it is very symptomatic that we are sitting here, 5 white people, Poland, Lithuania, Germany represented. We had maybe survival is taking place in different venues, but in the past 2 years we had hosted some partners from Tanzania, from Zambia. There were curators, there were artists whose works can be viewed today behind us, actually, in the dungeons of this beautiful palace behind us, and their works are an attempt to break this asymmetry. We will also be showing our works in Tanzania in November. So yes, the project at least attempted to break down those barriers. Hopefully you will agree with me, Thomas. But it was difficult. It was difficult. We needed to create new habits, new networks, new pathways. I'll give my mic one more chance. Hopefully it won't get worse. Okay, a question to Thomas then. You spent 23 years in ITI, right? As a director. It's a long time, I think. This is how long we've been organizing this festival, so I know how long exactly it is. So one more time, 23 years in ITI, and ITI mainly deals with international cooperation. So the question to you, I wanted to ask about your many years of experience in international cooperation. What are your thoughts? What has changed in the over 2 decades? Not just this short post-pandemic time, but what kind of timeline would you paint for us, starting from the 90s to today, 2025? Where are we in building intercontinental relations? Not necessarily with Africa. I know that ITI moved its office from Europe to Asia, for example.
Exactly. I mean, we are, to say, after this 23 years, right now in a situation of entering a new process of international relationships, I guess. We all see what happens worldwide, and I guess the whole development which started after 1945 now turns into something different. No one really knows in what direction it will go, but it will be different. Just to say what changed, I mean, in the 90s and 0 years and with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the globalization process, there was a lot of sudden, I would say, incomplicity of cooperation. So people could meet really on eye level wherever and whenever they want. And so this kind of no need of organizations just to step into the practical processes and having direct working relationships was a very dynamic element, so that from that, these really informal networks of artists started really to develop itself to something like production networks, which occurred then to be a little bit more formal, to apply for grants and to get some support, and then to continue their artistic based cooperation, which was not politically based, as it has been in the 80s and before, where representation was a tool of cultural diplomacy. Right now we are entering into something different, where representation and belonging becomes suddenly much more important and somehow covers a lot of other conditions and aspects of cooperation. So what we need now is, and I heard during one of our last conferences in Madrid last week some very good points from our African partners. A shift from this focus to grants on international cooperations away to a diversification of the sources of our work. So grant is only one possibility, and of course the question where comes the money from is important, but it is not sustainable, as our colleague Uwa Berger from North Africa said, because she's a brilliant person in research and a lot about alternative sources of funding. And the different structures of funding in both continents are an enormous important source of getting knowledge about possibilities of cooperation. Because what we can learn from other structures is to get a distance to what we are familiar with, and to just continue as we did in the decades before is something which we would be forced through the circumstances to shift and to sometimes unlearn and shift to something new. And for that, this direct cooperation with African countries who have experienced decades of civil wars and insecurity and the need for improvisation and for just getting alternative structures for themselves, temporary structures, improvised structures, which can shift from one day to another, but somehow deal with this overwhelming situation of uncertainty and not to be overwhelmed by it, but to just dance with the circumstances. And this is something which I found very much interesting and important to get this from this project, because we have the luxury to put the structures itself, the obstacles, and all the processes which are around the artistic cooperations as well on the stage as a matter of reflection. So we do not have to produce and to deliver. We have to reflect on this project, and we have to find lessons to learn. And to learn from each other is not just a word to say, okay, we do it so, but I guess for us as Europeans, it will be very important to really get familiar what it means to learn from the African partners.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully this mic will work better. Yeah, for me, I will reflect on what you've just said, because we are talking I think personally, so I can reflect on my personal experience and told you about deconfining project and my experience in deconfining project. So production with our residents was an amazing adventure. The entire process lasts 2 years. Since the open call through visits in Poland and in Tanzania, it was a very, very intense time and process. And yesterday, when I was walking around the exhibition and I had a chance to see everything and watch video arts, I was stunned by the distance or the lack of distance that was between people. They were close to each other. I noticed the project by Miss Key, Miss Key, Josephine, our resident, Josephine Kiaga from Tanzania. And she, thanks to interviews conducted in Poland and in Tanzania, realized interesting video art on perceiving menstruation in these two different geographical regions, which is a great piece of art, great work of art, and I would like to recommend it to all of you. But there are many of them, of course. And when I was watching Linda Dedek, a Czech-German artist, resident of the program, that devoted her time to trees. Trees in Tanzania and trees in Central Europe. And again, I was hit by the closeness of that when I was watching the video art, because artists see much more connections than other people. That was just my yesterday's reflection. And now I would like to ask Edgar. I would like to ask you, Edgaras, about challenges. Edgaras, about your challenges and successes, biggest challenges and successes in your recent collaboration. How did it finish, or did it finish? I'm talking about collaboration with Burkina Faso. Has it finished, or are you going, or are you planning to continue this cooperation? Because you wrote that you want to internationalize the theater, to make it international. Do you plan more cooperation with Burkina Faso or with Senegal?
Thank you. At the moment, we feel like the projects that we did, they are still, rolling in a way, because this film is being still presented, like here, for example, and we hope that it will be presented in some other film festivals, maybe. And the performance just won the national awards, the national award for the best stage directing, our Lithuanian national award, Golden Cross, just this spring.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So speaking about successes. So yeah. So we feel that we are still involved in this project, and we're still kind of developing and disseminating those two things that we have already done. I hope that we will continue, because there were two things to say that surprised me. One was how easy and simple it was to communicate to African artists. Well, at least guys from Burkina Faso. We also had two younger writers when we started, and of course Senegal, the raw material. And Hamedine, others, how easy it was on the personal level, like probably you said also, like if you get started, it just goes, you know. We we started with a meeting of 4 young writers. 2 were from Lithuania and 2 were from Africa. One was from Burkina Faso, another was from Burundi. And, you know, I just introduced them. We were using Teams, you know. I just introduced them, and before I knew it, they had already their own group in Facebook or whatever, you know, and they said, okay, we're just, you know, and it just started moving, you know, with no problems. Of course, all those artists that we involved, they are all university graduates. They all speak languages. They all have been to Europe on their projects. So we see only a little part of African, you know, artistic world, of course. But all of them were already part of the international art market or international art world. And it's just the question of how do you get to know them? How do you make this first connection? I think that further on it will happen. Another thing that was successful and that surprised me and gives me hope that we will do something further was that the success that it had in Lithuania, especially the performance, was very successful. Like I said, won the national prize, but also there was huge media coverage. You know, the media was so interested. What are you doing with Africa? What is happening there? You know, what? So it looked like everyone was very interested, and the performance is very popular among the public. So there is such an interesting thing that on the one hand, we have this forms of, you know, racist bias, I should say, like, you know, not racism like in this most horrible physical attack form, but in this kind of cognitive bias, you know, like African artists, you know. But then we also have this huge interest from the audience, you know, so I think that, yeah, that we will be doing something with our partners. So on the interpersonal level, it's just smooth. It is just a question of money and politics then. Well, speaking about 3. Reacting to Alicja, so I just want to say that hopefully I hope we are not speaking about Africa. That would be very strange, you know, like us sitting here. And I hope, God forbid, we're not speaking for Africa, you know. So, and that was a very important thing that I tried to explain for our artists working with, you know, staging the play, that we're not speaking for Africa. You know, you know nothing about Africa, so yeah.
Moja uwaga była też pokierowana doświadczeniami, jakie...
Yes, and my remark was guided by the experiences, even on the international level, even in countries that are advanced in working with Africa. There are still problems with visas, impossibility to travel abroad from Africa to Europe, for example. So there is a European meeting of partners with the confining project, for example. Europeans are in the room, and then all the African ones are on Zoom because they couldn't get to the country because there were problems with passports, with visas. So I think us sitting here in person is one of the institutional barriers I mentioned. Okay, one more conclusion. For today, then, last year we had 3 resident artists, one person from Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And I'm not going to talk about all the adventures, let's say, we had, but one was particularly interesting, I think. The Kenyan resident artist. It seems it would be the easiest because we have an embassy in Kenya, Polish. Nairobi is a difficult city, but still, it's very busy. But still, we thought it's going to be the easiest. It was the opposite. It was the most difficult. There were numerous administrative problems with her, particularly, that cost a lot of stress to the artist. We never calculate that, or we never take that into account in the whole process of producing the project, how stressful it can be for such people traveling abroad, through all those procedures and processes they need to go through to leave their country. Simply put, for us on the other side, the cost of the travel, the financial cost, because of so many administrative and technical obstacles, lack of cooperation from the Polish embassy. So the cost of bringing them there was tripled eventually, from getting person from Kenya to Poland. That's the fact. So we need to somehow take that into account. This completely unpredictable area or aspect, and we are a foundation. We use grants, so we need to explain it to somebody higher. Fortunately, Creative Europe is quite a flexible grant giver, basing its settlements on what we provide or the results of our cooperation. But still, it was a process. Extremely stressful, particularly for the person who was supposed to just come here, being invited here, not doing anything wrong. So in deconfining, part of our team deals with research, creates reports based on limitations and obstacles related to international cooperation. There's one particularly noteworthy, Ukona's report. I think she invited us to have a completely different perspective on creating policies and cultural activities, especially activities based on empathy. This is the word, I think, that revolves around or recurred in the report. She devoted a lot of pages and words talking about this immense stress that we undergo when we need to deal with such administrative regimes like visas, for example. I strongly recommend this part of our report. Anna, question to you. This year, we have a 20th anniversary of UNESCO Convention devoted to promotion of diversity, cultural diversity, especially. Poland is one of the signatories of this convention. And following a lot of discussions about it, I know that the Ministry of Culture is dealing with the convention, not your ministry, but still, I'm trying to, keep in touch with all the discussions that are ongoing. And I think there's one article in the Convention 16, I think, that focuses on the obligation among the signatories to facilitate the artists from developing countries or to the countries from the global south or the global majority, as we call it sometimes, to facilitate their free travel and their artistic their ability to perform their art in Europe, for example, on the global north. We know that it doesn't really happen. I mean, they don't have it easy, but still we celebrate the anniversary. So would you say that from your perspective or from the perspective of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, would you say that in 2025, when there is growing interest in cooperation with African countries, and I'm not talking about former colonizers, but the whole BRICS and the states that, we are not that friendly with, these countries are very much engaged in building partnerships, cultural, but of course predominantly also economic and political partnerships. So would you say that Poland has or is going to have a cultural strategy towards African countries, or maybe creating a Polish institute somewhere in Africa? That would be two different things, Polish institute and cultural strategy towards African countries. But yes, it is a problem. taking into account all those elements that we've been discussing. And then you mentioned Article 16 of this convention, migration policies of different states, and the things that we would like to strengthen in Polish African or European African cooperation. It's a true minefield, and we, I think, are still learning how to move around it. The politics are sometimes more, sometimes less comfortable, but we are obliged by those principles. Not necessarily consistent, mind you. So I don't feel like speaking for Poland here, how to solve problems. But yes, what I can say is that it is difficult. Shaping these international relations, cultural relations, also having all those challenges in mind, geopolitical challenges also in mind. There is a study visit program I mentioned, and we're trying to cooperate stronger with African partners. I think that may solve at least some of the problems or facilitate some of the issues that you had, as you mentioned, with this Kenyan artist. And I think this would be individual, but I still think this would be individual cases, not systemic changes. It's difficult for me to say why, in the face of 20th anniversary of this convention, we don't have a lot to boast about. We're not making it easier right now. I think it's a question about a very complex puzzle, not only involving Poland. So one extra question about the strategy: are there any plans to intensify the cooperation, the partnerships between Poland/Europe and Africa, or do you think that we are satisfied with the level cooperation through the embassy, through the unique network? What kind of strategy are you talking about? Is it the state strategy? Because that would need to be developed between different ministries. We would have to create a forum to discuss that. And I think, well, Poland lacks general foreign policy strategy. So it would be even more difficult. I mean, for cultural relations, of course. So it would be even more difficult to talk about a strategy that would be even more narrowed geographically. This is the current state of being we're talking about. Thomas, I think you wanted to speak, right?
I just learned for a couple of days ago that Poland is one of the few countries which already ratified the Samoa Agreement, which has been negotiated for many years and was signed by Europe and the sub-Saharan African states, some Caribbean states and Pacific states, about a big framework of cooperation in general. And culture has in it 2 chapters. And the other hand, which you already mentioned, is the unique program about the culture cooperation between Africa and Europe, which now goes into this as a special program with a lot of money and a lot of conditions which countries and projects could apply for. So I get the conditions are right now not bad, and Poland is really an advantage and really one of the avant-garde countries who already ratified this agreement. So I guess from that point we are in a quite good position. On the other hand, I would say about imbalances, which we mentioned before, not to forget that we have as well an enormous imbalance that our African partners are much more an advantage about in terms of knowledge about our structures, about our markets, about our ways of producing and even languages than the other ways. So I guess this Article 16 from the UNESCO Convention is a very important mindset, especially for us, for Europeans, and for the northern countries in terms of the position towards the global south.
Thank you very much for that voice. Alicja, let's move on to you. We are representatives of NGOs here, both of us, I mean. We both work in institutions. Our role is slightly different here, I think. So how do you perceive the role of NGOs in all that complex puzzle, building relations, international, intercontinental relations? No. Let's not stop talking about continents. Between two states, between different people in those states, what is the role of NGOs? When do you see limitations and challenges for forming such relations? A strong and difficult question, I would say, because NGOs should serve to close the gap where bigger institutions are lacking. So the ministry doesn't want to do this, so maybe let's have an NGO deal with that. I think there's like hope among many stakeholders that this will happen magically somehow. However, we are still ailing at this grant disease, so to say, because we live from one grant to another. There is a problem with financial liquidity, and the difficulty in forming cooperation with African countries, I think, lies here. There is a grant for a particular amount of money, and we can choose our partners, we can choose the activities, the amount of participants, the amount of, events we will create, the exhibitions. So the costs are related to cooperation with African partners, because of bureaucratic reasons, would be higher, as you said. Then the organizations would probably choose something closer, not because they don't want to, but because it is financially challenging. It takes a lot more effort. So here, I think we are some of the determined few to conduct such cooperation and decide to foster European-African cooperation despite all the difficulties. But there is a lot of organizations, when they hear Africa, they would have a list of problems in their mind, so probably they would prefer to say no, because they know the difficulties in forming such cooperation. Of course, as an NGO, I can say that we may try to close the gap, and I'm under great impression of how Art Transparent does it, but should it really be done by an NGO? Really? Because it's difficult. It's difficult to struggle with all those difficulties, administrative ones, to say the least. In Go and Act, we mainly deal with educational projects, and something very close to us are narratives about Africa, stories about Africa, and I eagerly listen to what you're talking about. There is lack of interest in cultural in African culture in Poland, and I agree, unfortunately, with that, because our knowledge about Africa in Poland is very, very low. Well, in fact, the knowledge about Africa is taken from school. And what did we learn from school? That there is hunger in Africa, there's poverty in Africa. We read one of the famous Polish books. Is called in Desert and Bush. And this is a book. Written down in, I think, mid-20th century, and it's so racist. Well, let me quote. They have black brains, but your brain should be white. You are their king. You should enlighten them. You should teach them about the Bible. They are like hyenas. Change them into people. Change old, dirty habits to good ones, and God will thank you. People will not say that you're stupid, that the Negroes are stupid. I don't think that this is the quote we remember from the book, but still, because the book is beautiful, but still, this is the cultural context that embeds certain colonial thinking in us. Main protagonist, Staś, wants to conquer Africa, teaches Kali, his African friend, who was older than him. So this is one element of Polish education.
Of course, we educate teachers to focus and be more critical on what we learn at school about Africa. In one of the school books to geography, in one of these books, there is an information that due to war in Ukraine, there are problems with the crops, and there are other fragments. I think Kosiński wrote it from the book from the 60s, and this is information about Africa. Kosiński wrote it in the 1960s, and this is now in our books at schools. So we work with stereotypes that there is something wild about it, exotic about it. They are weird customs in Africa. Word weird is there. And there is information about famine. This is in the curriculum in Poland, that Africa equals famine, and then we graduate. And that's it. We learn nothing more about Africa. And that's why we, unfortunately, have this stereotypical thinking about Africa. And this is deeply rooted in us, and I think that NGOs need to work with that. They need to teach critical thinking, to broaden the perspective, to unlearn such things, because that's essential. And I can see that among artists that would like to cooperate with African partners or institutions, I see that we think that we know what African means. And there's some kind of expectation toward African artists, how the art should be like, look like. And it's not only about Africa, it's about other countries as well. And I remember a really sad talks with artists from the dancers from Southern Africa who came to Europe. They wanted to present a work of art, but they were not encrypted in this exotic, stereotypical concept of Africa, because they were totally different. And European partnerships weren't open enough to tell them, okay, let's show us what is African for African people. There was some expectation that it should be more. We knew better than they what is African. Even in associations that work with African cultures, such stereotypes can be present. I can give you a short example. Afro dance workshop, wonderful teacher, dancer, instructor shows Kwara Kwara move and says, remember, you have to work like wild people in Africa, like white tribe in Africa. DJ Bongs used it in the video, and he danced it on the Mercedes and other cars. So, that's totally different. So we don't even think about it for a second, what we are saying about Africa, even if we want to talk about it in a positive context. And here I see an important role of NGOs, because these build the foundations to make this cooperation more equal. Thank you. Slowly but surely we're moving to the end of our discussion. I have one question to all of our panelists. As Alicja, you've mentioned, we're all representing here Central Europe, in a sense. That's why there is a final question. Is it ready for us, for representatives of institutions from Central and Eastern Europe, bring to the global conversation anything interesting about culture and equality? So what unique perspective can Eastern European and Central institutions bring to the global conversation about culture and equality. So let's not talk about globalization. We don't have time for that. I would like to ask you about can Central and Eastern Europe bring anything to the global conversation about culture and equality? Because, of course, we see this conversation with African partners differently than Western countries. That's obvious. But what we want to bring in, what are we bringing into this global conversation about culture and inequality? Do you see any attempts like that? Or Edgaras, your activities in Kaunas, is it an attempt to do something differently, to make something different in this global conversation about relationship between Africa and Europe?
Fine.
Yeah. I will shortly just say that, of course, we can, since we also have our own experiences of say, Russian imperialism for the last 300 years. We had a very particular forms, very particular strategies, very particular. So, in this comparative perspective, we speak about comparativism, right? Or comparative studies, we can relate our experience to the experiences of people in Africa or anywhere else. So I think this is, and then comparisons always bring out some new points, associations, parallels, and allows us to see better who we are and who they are and how we can, move on.
I would forget for 1 second about geography, and I would focus on the fact that we should forget about stereotypes. We should try to look at each other. And it would be nice to meet, basically, and we should look at each other and listen carefully to each other. That's the most important thing, that we need to keep quiet our voice inside our head and listen to the other voice that's in front of us. And that would be perfect if they would be able to listen to what we want to say, and we should listen to them. That's the most important perspective. That's the priority. If we don't have it, then we won't be successful. I totally agree with what you've already said. I would like to add that the geographical aspect in the perspective of the dialogue may not matter. No matter where we are, it's to just, to looking at the person without borders, without nationalities. And we shouldn't look for differences, we shouldn't look for obstacles, we should look at a person. And I agree with the historical aspect as well, that in a way we have quite a lot in common historically with the countries that are that were colonies. We also were a country with strong ambitions to colonialism in the 1920s and 30s. That finished, and even the book I told you about by Sienkiewicz described it. So we also have to face this past. Sometimes we don't want to see that in our history. When Poland regained sovereignty, we wanted to keep up with other countries, and we took part in this colonial race. We failed, I can say now, fortunately. But this is the element that we as Poles should work out. I mean, we should notice this part of the history. We have the element in this narrative, and we should be more critical about it. We should draw some conclusion from that.
So, from my point of view, I would say that Eastern and Central Europe share a lot of history in the experience of having culture as a common good. And this kind of community aspect of culture, which is slightly away from the Western perspective of culture as a economic value which is being sold on the market and has its certain economic values and is just a matter of investment or speculation in the art markets, but as well as in the performing arts. I guess this one is rather close to the concept of community arts in Africa, and has some good points to share and to come into communication with. So this concept of culture as a common good is now even adopted by the UNESCO, and of course this turns a little bit away from and keeps up this idea from the convention, which defines culture in its both aspects, as an economic value, but as a value in itself, which creates value, artistic value, non-commercial value, identity, and meaning. And so this is something which probably could be a good aspect for the communication and for the cultural relationships.
Do you have any questions to our panelists? No questions. So I would like to wrap up with one thought. Intercontinental projects are very difficult, but because of that, they give us more satisfaction and pleasure. And networking builds wonderful connections and relationships, the results of which you can see at our exhibition in the theater in Kaunas or in many other places in Europe. During our exhibitions, we had a call with Madrid to prove that in two different places in Europe, two exhibitions of the contemporary African art are opening at the same time, which was great. And it was really nice that it is happening. Goethe Institute in Madrid was opening their activities of their residents in the confining project. And I think that we are all people and we have the need to socialize and to build things together. It's of utmost importance, and I cannot imagine intercontinental cooperation without that. And I think there will be more of that cooperation, but we have to deal with the challenges. There are quite a lot of them, but it's worth to beat all the challenges. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, panelists, that you accepted my invitation. It was a great pleasure to talk to you. And hopefully I will see you soon in the deconfining project or in any other one soon. Thank you again.